There were many times where I doubted myself and my own abilities because I didn't feel that anyone else around me trusted me enough to take a chance.
Right.
And so that held me back for a very, very long time. And I think there were so many situations where I felt that, but thankfully sport gave me sort of another avenue to be able to express those, thoughts and feelings and the energy that I had at the time. But I think what I experienced most, especially as a child and as a teenager, was exclusion. So it wasn't the way we talk about bullying now. I wasn't exposed to social media when I was growing up, thank goodness. What I did feel was a lack of acceptance and a lack of people willing to say, come and join our group or come and join this birthday party. Really simple things, but it sends a very powerful and loud message that because you look a certain way, you don't fit in.
Welcome back. This is Tell Me Why. I'm Maria Botros, and today we are going to talk about a topic that is very dear to my heart and that I enjoy quite a lot, which is inclusion. And with me in the studio is Jessica Smith, who is a disability inclusion consultant. Jessica, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
You're a very, very busy woman.
I am, but I'd never like to say that in a complaining way. I'm very fortunate to be this busy.
Yes. We get that and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the time that you're giving us. So we're going to try to keep this as focused as possible while getting to know you. So before we get started, I just wanted to get to know you. Who is Jessica? Like, what was your childhood like? And just tell us about your journey.
So I was born in Australia, and I was born missing my left arm, and to this day we still don't know why that actually occurred. We think maybe that it was, when I say we, my parents and I, after speaking with them, that amniotic bands of fluid form in the really, really early stages of development in the womb, and sometimes they can latch onto limbs and it just stops the growth. So we think and assume that that's probably what happened. But when I was born, the doctors advised my parents to have me fitted with a prosthetic limb from as young as possible, thinking that it would help aid my growth and development. And I think, unfortunately, at that time, a lot of the medical professionals looked at disability as broken and disformed and disfigured, and they needed to fix me. So, of course, not that was sort of a negative intention, but the idea was that, I would be fitted with this fake arm from as young as possible. And unfortunately, what was supposed to help me failed me in probably the cruelest of ways. So I'd just been fitted with my first fake arm. And I was at home in the kitchen with my mum and noticed a plate of biscuits on the bench. And being a curious toddler, I reached up to grab a biscuit, but because I couldn't feel or detect heat in the arm that I was wearing, I didn't realize that I'd also knocked a kettle over. And as I looked up, I spilt boiling water onto myself, and I sustained third-degree burns to 15% of my body. I'm lucky it didn't splash onto my face, but I do have prominent scarring on my neck and chest, and I spent years in and out of hospital in Australia for recovery, skin grafting, all sorts of different things. And I think at that time, it was just a place of where we were as a society when it came to looking at disability. And I certainly grew up with this notion that I was so different to everybody else, and it was so obvious because I was missing my arm and I had such prominent scarring on my neck and chest. However, my parents thankfully were able to push beyond a lot of that narrow thinking at the time, and I grew up with the mindset, because of my parents, that if there was anything that seemed too hard, I had to at least try. I have 3 younger brothers. We're all very close in age, and we're a very sporting family. And so I think from that idea of never wanting me to feel sorry for myself, I was able to focus a lot of my time and energy on how I was going to prove to the world that I wouldn't be limited by my disability. And the obvious way for me to do that was through movement and sport and exercise. And I fell in love with all sorts of sports, but in particular swimming.
Amazing.
And when I was 10, I competed at my first school event and I won. And I beat all the girls and boys with 2 hands. And for the first time in my life, I felt as though I was being acknowledged for what I could do, rather than the perceived deception from others or their assumptions about what they thought I couldn't do. And that was really a very pivotal moment in my life, even at the age of 10, to sort of think, well, this makes me feel amazing, and so I want to continue doing this. And that's sort of how my swimming career started. But throughout that entire process was a constant battle of social discrimination and trying to figure out my own identity in a world that is so fixated on our appearance and beauty and how that is measured as a sign of success.
Right.
So really sort of struggling with that as I grew up.
I was just going to ask that. I know that the times have changed, but in the past, it was very difficult for people with certain disabilities. Do you prefer that term? Like, I always ask my guests, like, do you prefer to say person of disability? I like people of determination. I like that it gives them the power to do whatever they want.
It is a very empowering statement. I think, after growing up in Australia and how I guess the world of the disabled community is positioned at the moment is we want to share that the word disability is not bad or wrong, and so it's good to use that word. But if there's other phrases that people feel more comfortable with, then absolutely. But for me, there's nothing wrong with the word disability.
That's good to know, because I think a lot of people kind of like tiptoe around the word, and they don't prefer using it because they don't want to make it seem like they're trying to say that you're limited or there's a negative connotation with the word that I think you're trying to get rid of, or from what you're saying is you're trying to shift that, that perception.
Yes.
So going back to the question is, growing up with a disability, how was that? Like, besides the fact that you were saying there was a lot of discrimination, as a child in a classroom or with peers, how was that?
It was challenging at times when I felt as though other people didn't think I could do something. So I think I was acutely aware of the fact that I was more disabled by my environment and the way people saw me than my actual disability. And that puts a lot of pressure on a young person to feel limited and sort of trapped within a social understanding or definition of what you're supposed to be. So what that meant was that there were many times where I doubted myself and my own abilities because I didn't feel that anyone else around me trusted me enough to take a chance. And so that held me back for a very, very long time. And I think there were so many situations where I felt that, but thankfully sport gave me sort of another avenue to be able to express those, thoughts and feelings and the energy that I had at the time. But I think what I experienced most, especially as a child and as a teenager, was exclusion. So it wasn't the way we talk about bullying now. I wasn't exposed to social media when I was growing up, thank goodness. What I did feel was a lack of acceptance and a lack of people willing to say, come and join our group or come and join this birthday party. Really simple things, but it sends a very powerful and loud message that because you look a certain way, you don't fit in with us. And I think that's what I really struggled with the most.
I have to say props to your parents for pushing you to achieve whatever you wanted to achieve, and for putting you in sports at such a young age to help you feel that self-achievement, that sense of accomplishment. You were saying at 10 years old, you won a race, and that gave you such a boost and such confidence in believing in yourself and knowing that people weren't just looking at you as, the person, who's missing an arm, but rather a person who won a race. And that gave you the confidence that you needed, that helped you actually get into swimming professionally. And that was my next question. Tell us about that. So how did that start? How did you get the thought? Like, when did you decide, okay, this is what I want to do?
I think at the time it went back to how I was feeling. And I think that's something that my parents always allowed me to do, was sit with those feelings and emotions. Sometimes I think perhaps they practice a tough love approach too much, but I understand that they were trying to prepare me for the world that I was about to live in, which was a world that wasn't designed or created for somebody like me. They knew that I was going to have to push a little bit harder and work a little bit harder. And so in those moments when I was swimming and, at a young age winning races, they said to me, what does that feel like? And when I said, this is exhilarating, this is amazing, they said, well, let's keep doing that. And I think I'm very grateful to have parents that allowed me to be in an environment where I was thriving. We see a lot of parents focus on where their child is potentially struggling and put a little bit too much effort on that. And what I'm grateful that my parents were able to do was say, well, this is something that you are excelling at, so let's put the time and energy there so that you can continue to feel that wonderful positive emotion. And because of that, I never wanted to stop swimming. So after that race, I remember saying to my mum and dad, I want to swim forever. I wasn't aware that there were races for athletes with a disability. I wasn't aware of the Paralympic Games. I just knew that that moment was something that I never wanted to lose. And so, I say unfortunately for my mum and dad, it meant driving me to the pool every morning and every afternoon around school times for the next few years until I got my license. And I grew up in a small town in Australia, and it meant in order for me to compete in particular races that were dedicated to athletes with a disability, we had to drive 8 hours every other weekend. And so it put pressure on, my mum and having to stay with my 3 younger brothers. But that level of support was there. And I think that, I'll be forever grateful for that because it propelled me into my international career as a swimmer.
And I'm sure it was lovely for them to do that. I'm sure they were more than glad to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
Seeing how exhilarating it was for you. You mentioned your siblings. I just want to, highlight that just a little bit, and then we'll move on. How was it like growing up with them? Like, how did your parents explain to them maybe like what you were going through, and how did it resonate with them as your younger brothers?
It's a good question. I'm not sure that there were ever any like major family discussions around it. It wasn't as if it was something that was constantly brought to attention. But I do know now that my brothers struggled as well, more so from a place of wanting to protect me. So I didn't really have this sort of realization until late into my 20s talking to my brothers. But there were many times where I was used as a point of weakness for other people trying to sort of attack my brothers, whether that was on the sporting field or in the school grounds. And so there were times where they felt a lot of resentment towards me, and I didn't understand that. And I don't think they understood that at the time. It was kind of like, I just, I hate my brother, I hate my sister, that sort of thing. But I realize now that it was quite complex for them as well. And they were also trying to figure out, well, what's their identity? What's their role as a sibling and as a brother to protect their sister, but to also want to have their own identity and not feel as though that is their responsibility. So I think there were many times, we still fight all the time, but we grew up on the morals and the values that, we all love each other very, very much, and we have so much respect for each other. And we're all very, very different. But I do appreciate that they were put into situations that they shouldn't have been because of me.
That's very sweet. That's very, very sweet. And I love the fact that it came from a place where they were just trying to protect you.
Yes, definitely.
In the end, it's all love.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the Paralympics.
Yes.
How was that? Like, how was that experience for you?
So this is a tricky question or a tricky answer because often when people ask that question, you're expecting it was the most amazing experience of my life and I went on to win a gold medal and that's the end of my Hollywood story. That's not how things went for me. So throughout my career, I started representing Australia from the age of 13 and represented them consecutively for 8 years. In that time, I'm also an adolescent, young female trying to figure out, high school and being popular and all of these things while also representing my country at the most elite level. And so there was a lot of pressure and I was struggling with body image issues. I was struggling with feeling as though not just that I had a disability, but I'm also a teenage girl wanting to, be seen and to be validated by my friends and, by boys and all this sort of stuff at school.
Yeah.
And so that impacted my emotional and mental health while I was also swimming and competing to the point where I lived with anorexia and bulimia for a very long time throughout my entire swimming career. And the reason that this is relevant is because when I did finally reach the Paralympic Games at the age of 19, it was the most amazing experience. I had worked so hard to get to that level, but because of the struggles that I was going through behind closed doors, it was as if it all came to a head at the same time. So here I am experiencing the most amazing and the highest point I could get to in my swimming career, but also the lowest I could have been in terms of my mental and emotional health. And so I was expected to medal in 3 events at the Paralympic Games in Athens, but I was the only member of the Australian swimming team to not make a final. And it actually took me a decade to even verbalize that out loud because of the shame and the guilt and the stigma associated with that. And it was traumatic for me, for my family who had traveled all that way to come and watch me compete, for my coach, for everyone who had been part of that support team, to get to that point and then realize that I wasn't able to deliver what was expected of me because my mental health was struggling so much.
Yes.
On the other side of that, I was also coming through the world of Paralympic sport at a very different time to what we see now. There was no funding. There was no sponsorship. So I was funding all of my trips. I was working while also training. And so I was starting to build resentment to society, I guess, because I didn't understand why my career in the pool wasn't being taken as seriously as the people I was training with. I never trained with anybody else with a disability, only ever other elite athletes. And so for me to see that, you know, we were being treated so obviously different was also impacting my mental health at that point. And when I arrived in Athens, you know, there were no crowds. There wasn't that level of support. And so I really struggled to understand, why was I still doing this? Who was I doing it for? And, you know, Athens was the pinnacle, but also my rock bottom in many ways as well.
And a moment of realization, I feel. And you were so young. I mean, going through all of that at such a young age, it's asking a lot of you, I have to say. I mean, when you think about your kids and thinking about one of your kids going through that at that age, you think, I mean, that's too much for a child to handle. I mean, it's only fair for you to reach that point. I want to just go back to the point that you made about your mental health and going through anorexia and bulimia. I feel like that's something that affects all girls at that age, that body image, that struggle of looking like a cover model. And it really gets to girls. And I just wanted you to say one piece of advice that you would have for girls that might be going through that struggle.
I think we have to realize that we're not alone and that every generation has experienced it to some degree, but we also need to know that we have the power in this day and age of social media to switch off, and we have the power to choose who we follow and who we don't follow. And so I do a lot of work with young women and young teenage girls to be able to give them the self-confidence to find the power within themselves to make those decisions. But it's very, very challenging because, like you said, I think we've all experienced that to some degree. And if you don't have that level of resilience and self-respect built in and a strong foundation of that, it can be very, very easy to compare yourself and to judge, and then to find yourself trapped in a world of trying to change who you are in order to please other people.
Of course, precisely. Okay, so now moving on to the new phase of your life.
Yes.
Now you are married with children and you have a new life here in Dubai. What made you come to Dubai? What are you doing here? We just want to get to know, so we know about your childhood now, briefly.
Yes.
Obviously, there's so much more that we can get into, but we know you're very busy, so we're going to keep it short. Tell us about now. What are you doing now, and how is it with kids in Dubai, preaching what you've lived through and helping young people going through such a tough time?
I'm so grateful for all the opportunities that I've been afforded after moving to Dubai. We've been here for nearly 5 years, and like many expats, we came for my husband's job initially.
Yes.
At the time, I had 2 children. I then had my 3rd child while I was here in Dubai, and I noticed that there was an opportunity to talk about the complexities of diversity and inclusion, because I felt as though disability wasn't really being discussed in those conversations. And so, other people might see that as a problem, as an issue, but I choose to see it as a fantastic opportunity for myself and everybody here to learn more. And what's so amazing about the community in Dubai is that everyone's receptive to that. And so it hasn't been difficult to have these conversations, which I'm very grateful for. I talk to children as young as 4 years old, right through to C-suite executives and board members about the importance of disability inclusion, whether that's in society or within an organisation. And so, it's been a wonderful journey. And what's interesting is it's the exact same message for all of those audiences, just told in a slightly different way. And I think for me, children are the most exciting audience because they're so innocent and they just want to say what they see.
I was just going to say,
Yes.
they're always curious and they're very honest
Yes.
and they're very they have no filter.
Exactly.
And I was just going to ask you, what are some of the questions that you were getting and how do you communicate that? How do you educate them?
I want everyone to embrace that. We need to continue to ignite that level of curiosity that our children have because when they see me, I do look different. I only have one arm. And so for a lot of them, the first question is, what happened? And when I tell them I was born missing my arm, a lot of them are like, oh, that's such a boring story. And then, I explained that my 3 brothers told some very elaborate stories about what had happened to me growing up. And, they laugh and it's a way to connect. But I think what's really lovely is that, I have a series of children's books which I use as that, opportunity to connect first. Here's a story, a beautiful story about a character with one hand, and then they're able to see the connection with me. But almost instantaneously, once they know and once they've seen and asked their 1 or 2 questions, they'll then find things about me that they identify in themselves or a family member. So you will often have children say, my mum has blonde hair or my mum has green blue eyes. And it is so beautiful.
That's so sweet.
Because we as adults often project our own fears, or not often, always project our own fears and our preconceived ideas onto our children. But if we allow them the opportunity to explore curiosity and explore what's different without any intervention, I think is really important. So to give you an example, when I'm at the park with my children, there will always be another child that says, Mum, that lady only has one hand. And the response will 9 times out of 10 be shh, and they'll pull their child away. And what you do in that moment is you take away such a beautiful opportunity to simply validate what your child has seen.
Yes.
So I always say to parents or guardians, anyone with a younger child, just to say, yeah, she does. Yeah. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. But every time you create a scene where a child feels, oh, well, we can't talk about that now, you are letting them know that there's something wrong with this situation. There's something wrong with that lady with only one hand. And so through my storytelling, to audiences of all different ages, I'm able to say it's okay to simply say what we see. Of course, it's about respect and it's about having the right terminology. But as children, we can't expect them to know that and we can't expect them to develop that if they haven't been given the chance to at least say what they first see.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, you mentioned a point that I was actually going to, highlight as well, because growing up, I know, maybe not growing up, let's mention it. My nieces saw someone on a wheelchair before, and my mom was with us, their grandmother. So she's from a very old generation. And I remember them saying, why are they sitting down or why are they being pushed? And she said, we don't say that. Don't talk like that. And I remember them just wanting to know, what's happening? Why do they get to, be rolled around, but I'm walking on my 2 feet? They just want to understand. And it's so taboo. I mean, I come from an Arab family, and these things are not proper. You don't talk about these things. Don't point out someone else's difference. And it did create a barrier growing up, and I didn't want that for my nieces as well. And I know that schools now are doing so much more with awareness. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I believe that you're a big part of that because, as you said, if the kids don't know at a young age and if they don't understand it, how do you expect them to grow up and accept other people and to deal with other people, not based on their disability, but based on their abilities?
Exactly.
I mean, to look past the disability. I find that fascinating. Children are the key to building that future of inclusivity and inclusion.
And that's what I see now, is that some of the more challenging conversations I have with adults who have been conditioned to think a certain way.
Right.
And so for them to feel comfortable even talking to me about this, you can see they're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to say it. I'm like, it's okay. But let's give our children the opportunity to have those discussions at a much younger age so that these awkward conversations aren't taking place when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. But I do understand, of course, it's generational, even growing up in Australia, it's like people never want to offend. And I know that it comes from a place of good intent. And so I always have to remind myself of that as well, is that, people are wanting to make sure they don't say the wrong thing. And so I'm mindful of that as well. And also, moving here to this region, I had some learning to do because growing up with parents that were very much like just go out and try and, see how it goes. And to then understanding that a lot of people, even with a disability, have never had that opportunity because of the way and the culture and of how they were raised, which is totally okay as well.
Of course.
So, it's been really interesting for me to also take a step back and to be mindful and sensitive around the way other people have been raised with this idea of disability. But of course, that won't stop me from trying to position myself in a place of saying there's nothing wrong or evil about disability. But it's something that we all have to work on. Mainstream media, I was never represented in mainstream media. You only, and even to this day, typically see disability portrayed as the villain, and so our whole understanding of disability is associated or synonymous with less than or someone who is not correct. There's something wrong with that scenario, and we have to change that narrative.
We have to change that, of course. How was it with your kids?
So my children are 8, 6 and 3. So they're young. However, the conversations are still really important. And for me, I do what I do in terms of trying to speak to as many children as possible because I don't want my own children to ever feel as though they need to protect or defend me like my brothers had to. And so how do I do that? I do that by making sure that children everywhere feel comfortable talking about this so that my kids aren't excluded or bullied because of the fact that their mum is different. So obviously to them, it's just normal, They know, obviously, that their mum has one hand or a cool new robotic hand and other mums don't. But I'm very grateful that it's never been an issue where they have felt uncomfortable about that. I know that that's to come, obviously, because this is just how the world works and, we're meeting different people and again, being able to prepare them as best I can and be the best role model that I can, knowing that they'll face these challenges in their own life where my difference is seen as a negative in their experience. So I have to try and lessen that. But for the time being, I think that, the fact that I am out there and I do visit their schools and so other kids know me and are excited by the fact that I visit the schools and I've got this cool new robotic hand, it's an opportunity for everyone to be part of the conversation. So I have to continue doing that for my kids.
I love that. Okay. And talking about your robotic hand, so how do you did it take time to get used to it? Did you have to do, I'm talking from an injury perspective. Like if someone's injured, they have to do physiotherapy to get that muscle, trained. How was it?
It's taken, it has been challenging. I mean, I haven't worn a prosthetic limb or robotic hand or anything since I was about 8 years old. So I did try them again after I had my accident. But at the time, the technology was nowhere near as advanced as it is today. And it was more of a hindrance, and I was better off without it. So for 30 years, I haven't worn anything. But I've been watching, the advancements in technology around robotics and around prosthetics and also, more importantly, the way in which society is now starting to understand disability. So I mentioned at the beginning, we were looking at disability through a medical lens, whereas now there's so much more discussion around looking at disability through a social lens and realizing that it's us and it's the environment that create more of a disabling experience for somebody. And so I was contacted by the company to trial this hand, and I actually said no about 3 times because I thought I'm so far in my life, I'm too old, I don't need it. But then I thought, what if through my storytelling and through my journey, I can be showcasing this for somebody else who doesn't have a platform to share theirs, who may have had an injury, may have had an accident, or a child now who's born missing their limb and has access to this incredible technology. And so for me, it's about another opportunity in the conversation of education and awareness around disability. And what is so amazing is that kids aren't scared of this. I think 10 years ago they probably would have been.
I think so too, yeah.
You know, but society is changing. And so now when I go into a school, that is the coolest thing we've ever seen. And so I'm like, I have to keep wearing this because this now is another component to that really important conversation where kids are like, wow, she's half human, half robot, which is what a student said to me here in Dubai.
It's like you're a superhero.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And so imagine now that children are growing up with this idea that perhaps someone with a disability isn't at such a disadvantage. You know, wouldn't it be amazing if our whole perspective and idea around disability started to change because of how technology is advancing so quickly? I mean, I've been into the Museum of Future so many times and everybody thinks I'm part of the experience. But I think that's great. I think that's really exciting because, you know, it's something that kids can now be like kind of intrigued about, which then goes on to the same conversation around diversity, inclusion, respect. So it's just something that I'm excited to learn. You know, I'm learning all the time, but it does get a little bit tiring. It has taken some training, but it's okay.
Okay. I mean, as you said, it's something that you've gone, you know, most of your life without. So it takes some time to adjust, as anything.
Anything, exactly. I don't need it. I can do everything without it. But this is a cool and exciting opportunity for me to at least try. I mean, I've spilt many glasses of water trying to drink, but that's all part of it. And I think
it's a learning
experience.
Makes it fun. Yeah, why not? Okay. So other than children, do you work with other people? Like, do you work with people of disabilities, and do you help facilitate opportunities for them? I mean, I know that you're a consultant, so I just wanted to know a bit more about that.
Yes. So I do a lot of mentoring for other people living with a disability, but the majority of my work is actually going into corporate organizations to change people culture. So if we're wanting to employ more people with a disability, we can't just put them in a position to tick a box because it won't have the longevity that that person deserves and the organization deserves. So my role is to go in and to explain what is disability, what is inclusion, what of those is the right terminology, which is forever changing, by the way, to ensure that the people within an organization feel comfortable with a person of determination coming in so that everybody can feel supported. Because what we tapped on before was that sense of fear and that level of awkwardness, which then creates even more of a barrier for the person with a disability wanting to simply be able to fulfill a role. And I think that it's important that people realize that there are so many qualified, educated people living with a disability who simply haven't been given the opportunity, you know. I mean, the same argument can be said for, you know, the gender equality debate that we're still having. It's the same. And I think that that's why what I say is that if you don't have disability at your table, you don't have diversity or inclusion. And we need to be able to see this. There's also, I think it's about $8 trillion US dollars of untapped residual income every single year that people are not making the most of because they're not employing people with a disability, but the services that they're providing aren't inclusive. And if I as a person with a disability don't have a good experience, my family are less likely to, you know, engage with that organisation and the products and services. So when you put a value on that, there's certain people that respond better to that, you know. So for me, I'm trying to explain that there's a business case, there's also a humanity case as well.
Yes. It's funny that you mentioned gender equality as well and gender equity in the workplace. We had a guest last week who was talking about insurance policies that actually cater to the different people, and it's different from a man to a woman to a person of determination to someone with a certain background, a certain medical history. And I think that's the next step. I think getting companies to personalize these insurance policies, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Certain people have different needs and different medical needs, and I think that's another conversation that needs to be, you know, addressed as well.
Absolutely. I think organizations need to see that there's a benefit of making those slight accommodations for people and not looking at that as a cost, but as an investment in the people and the organization.
Exactly. You get loyalty in return.
Absolutely.
You get appreciation. You get more out of the person. I mean, it just comes full circle. Like it all feeds into each other. Okay, last two questions and I will let you go. I know that you're in a rush.
That's okay.
What's your advice to parents who might have a child with a disability? And then the next question is to people with disabilities or people of determination.
So for parents of a child or children with disabilities, you have to find support groups. Absolutely. And they do exist here in the UAE and all around the world. But it makes that journey so much easier when you know that there's other people who can understand and identify the same struggles that you're going with, because there are many, many struggles for parents.
Absolutely.
And it is financially, on their relationship. There's so many things that people just don't understand that add to the complexities of having children with a disability. So to find those support networks, but to keep active within those support networks, it can be very easy to sort of retract and distance yourself when things get tough. But by doing that, it's prioritizing their own mental and emotional well-being, which is crucial. So reaching out to those groups. And then what was the last question? For
people of determination. Yeah.
I think, it's about being brave enough to feel confident sharing our stories, because the more we can share our stories, the more people learn, and the more people are able and capable and willing enough to be that little bit more accepting and understanding, because people don't know what they don't know. And I'm not saying that everyone with a disability needs to be an advocate or needs to be an educator, not at all, because I think the responsibility on the rest of society is to also appreciate that. I know I was born to challenge the status quo. I know I need to be in this position to be a voice for many others, but it's because they don't have a voice of their own. So if we can, support one another, and that's why there is so much of my time that I do give back to the community, especially here in the UAE, of people of determination, to make sure that they know that there are other people fighting for them, and just to never give up. And again, for them to reach out to support groups and to be around people who understand what they're going through. It makes a huge difference when you feel as though you're not doing this battle alone.
Of course. Absolutely.
But just to add on that, not that it's a battle, I think that's important, but the battle of constantly having to fight. And I think for me, I always had to prove that I was the best at everything in order to counteract the fact that I had a disability. And that's an unfortunate pressure that a lot of people of determination, people with a disability, feel. And for those people to realize that you don't have to carry that burden either. It's okay to simply be whoever you are.
Yeah, I absolutely get what you meant by battle, because we speak about support groups for women who are going through postpartum depression, and it is a battle. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be something negative. It's just a matter of getting the support that you need. So it doesn't have to be a negative, journey or a difficult one. Jessica, thank you so much.
Thank you
for joining us. It was lovely, and we'd love to have you back. If there's
Anytime.
any new initiative, anything that you want to talk about, we'd always love to have you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.